on Chanukah. And we're going to analyze a certain aspect of Chanukah which is unique, analytical and talmudic at the same time, fascinating and inspirational. And it's going to be a topic that many of us have never really knew about or studied about. And we're going to begin with, why do we celebrate Hanukkah in the first place? And I'm sure most of us are thinking, we know why we celebrate Hanukkah in the first place. We celebrate Hanukkah because the miracle of the oil, the Maccabees, we know the general story. But as always with the Talmud, right? Three Jews, two Jews, three opinions. It's not so simple. It's not so simple. And we're going to analyze why we celebrate Hanukkah, why 8 days, difference in customs, and then end off with an interesting twist pertaining to our moment to moment, not just day to day, but every minute of our service with God. And we'll jump right into it, beginning with a quote from the Talmud. The Talmud and Tractate Shabbos, there is no tractate on Hanukkah. The Talmud on Tractate Shabbos is the source, the earliest known source that we discuss in Jewish literature pertaining to the holiday of Hanukkah. And the Talmud asks the simple question, what is Hanukkah? Seems like a simple question, but as we shall soon see, there's much debate around what exactly does the Talmud mean with this question. But now we'll just take it as face value. What is Hanukkah, this holiday that everyone knows, everyone celebrates, we eat donuts and latkes, and it's exciting. What is this holiday? Why do we celebrate it? The sages taught on the 25th of Kislev, there are 8 days of Hanukkah. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. Because when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oil that was in the sanctuary. When the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious, they searched and found only one jug of oil with the high priest's seal remaining. There was sufficient oil there to light the menorah for only 1 day. A miracle occurred, and they lit from the one jug for 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days, and made them holidays with the recitation of Hallel and special thanksgiving. Now, when we talk about Hanukkah generally, we're quite familiar with the general story. Second century BCE, the Holy Land was ruled by the Syrian Greeks. They tried to force the people of Israel, the Jewish people, to accept Greek culture and Greek beliefs instead of believing in God and performing the commandments. Escalation after escalation, oppression after oppression, and there was a small band of Jews, the priestly family of the Hasmoneans, led by Matisyahu, their father, and their older brother Judah Maccabee. They formed a small band of a ragtag army, and little by little, through guerrilla warfare, they overcame, and they forced the Assyrian Greeks out of Israel. They then entered the temple, and that's where this portion of the Talmud comes in. They managed to force the Greeks out of the temple. They entered the temple, and they searched for oil. The oil had to have a special signet from the high priest, because if it did not, that meant that the oil was defiled. And defiled oil cannot be used in the holy temple. It had to be holy oil. And we're not going to get into it. We've discussed it at length in the past. What exactly does holy oil mean? And last year, if you recall, the Hanukkah class was solely on the topic of oil. And so, until they found this one jug of oil. The jug of oil was only enough to last for 1 day, a 24-hour period, but they decided they're going to light it anyhow, even though it took 7 days to go ahead and get new oil. They placed the oil in the menorah, and miraculously it lasted for 8 days. So we're quite familiar with the story. But if you analyze the story of Hanukkah the way the Talmud presents it, it seems to be quite different. The Talmud nary a mention of the battle that happened against the Greeks. The whole story of the Maccabees is almost non-existent. We mention it in very little words, very few words, because when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, and then when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious, It's almost like the miracle is non-existent. It was a few people overtook the building in the temple, the building known as the temple, and then the Hasmoneans came and eradicated them from the building. That's not the big miracle. That's not a miracle we're celebrating. The miracle that we're celebrating is the subsequent 10 lines that talks about the miracle of the oil. What is going on here? And so some explain that really what the sages are asking is not really ignoring the events. It's not really ignoring the miracle. It's just analyzing one aspect of the holiday, and it's discussing the aspect of the holiday pertaining to the candlelights. And so that's why it doesn't really mention the Greeks and the miracle of the battle, which seems to be the largest overarching miracle of the entire Hanukkah saga. And that's why it's omitted here, not because this is the entire situation of Hanukkah. But for that, we go to our favorite commentary, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, famous French sage, back in the 12th century. And he explains quite succinctly that this is actually explaining why we celebrate Hanukkah. In his words, text 1b, what is Hanukkah? Explains Rashi, meaning on account of which miracle did they establish the holiday? Rashi explains this isn't merely one aspect of the holiday that's being analyzed. It's not just one aspect of the holiday that's being highlighted and discussed. This is the entire reason for the holiday of Hanukkah, which brings us back to that question saying, that's it? The Greeks were in the temple and the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious from what? From kicking them out of the temple? Really, is that what Hanukkah is all about? Only the miracle of the oil? And the truth is, Rashi, his viewpoint is that this is what the Talmud is explaining. And so the Talmud, they're practically speaking, that is what we celebrate, right? What do we eat on Hanukkah? Donuts, latkes. Why? Because they're fried in oil. What do we do on Hanukkah? Like the menorah. Everything, why do we have Hanukkah for 8 days? Because the menorah burns for 8 days. Everything that we do, all the rituals on Hanukkah that we do are all associated with this miracle of lighting the oil. What ritual do we do associated with the miracle of the battle, of the war? Nothing. We make a mention of it in the special prayer that we add every single Amidah prayer throughout Hanukkah. It's a special prayer where we discuss the battle and how the Jews, which were a small band, emerged victorious. But no actual ritual. Eating donuts, the oil. It's all about the oil. That's Rashi's opinion. That's Rashi's explanation of the Talmud. And so that is his opinion that this is the sole purpose of celebrating Hanukkah, celebrating the miracle of the oil. But as we mentioned, there's always more than one opinion. And so Maimonides takes a different approach. And Maimonides explains as follows. In his book, the Mishnah Torah, the laws of Hanukkah, he goes at great length, is really out of character from a book of laws, and for Maimonides in particular, to give historical backgrounds to a law. Regularly, Maimonides just states the law itself, but when it comes to Hanukkah, he gives the full historical backgrounds. In the Second Temple era, the Greek kingdom issues decrees against the Jewish people, attempting to nullify their faith and refusing to allow them to observe the Torah and its commandments. They extended their hands against their property and their daughters. They entered the sanctuary, wrought havoc within, and made the sacred impure. The Jews suffered great difficulties, for they oppressed them greatly until the God of our ancestors had mercy upon them, delivered them from their hand, and saved them. The sons of the Hasmoneans, the high priests, overcame, slew them, and saved the Jews from their hand. They appointed a king from the priests, and sovereignty returned to Israel for more than 200 years, until the destruction of the temple. And so that's in the first law. That's an entire law. Maimonides gives historical backgrounds. Only in the following law does he go ahead and explain the next aspect of the miracle. Law 2, when the Jews overcame their enemies and destroyed them, they entered the sanctuary. This was on the 25th of Kislev. They could not find any pure oil in the sanctuary except for a single jug. It contained enough oil to burn for merely 1 day. They lit the arrangement of candles from it for 8 days until they could crush olives and produce pure oil. The second miracle. Not only did they emerge victorious, but the menorah burnt for 8 days, even though it contained oil merely for 1 day. And now Maimonides, in his third law of the laws of Chanukah, teaches us as follows. Accordingly, the sages of that generation ordained that these 8 days, which begin from the 25th of Kislev, should be commemorated to be days of happiness and praise of God. Candles should be lit in the evening at the entrance to the houses on each and every one of these 8 nights to publicize and reveal the miracle. These days are called Chanukah. It is forbidden to eulogize and fast on them as on the days of Purim. Lighting the candles on these days is a rabbinic mitzvah, like the reading of the Megillah. And so what Maimonides is doing here is true to his organized and concise style. He's presenting Chanukah in 3 segments. Law number 1 is the first reason why we celebrate Chanukah, namely the oppression of the Greeks and the subsequent victory and salvation. Law number 2 is the second reason why we celebrate Chanukah, the miraculous incident with the oil that lasted 8 days. And law number 3 is the statement, the establishment of the holiday, and what the rituals are associated with that holiday. In other words, Maimonides is taking a different view than Rashi and saying that no, the reason why we celebrate Chanukah is for 2 reasons. For the salvation of the Jewish people against the hands of the Greeks, and for the miracle of the oil. As opposed to Rashi, who seems to imply that when the Talmud discusses the miracle of the oil, that is the only reason why we celebrate Chanukah. In other words, he's not ignoring the fact that there was a miraculous war. That's a fact. That's what happened. But that's not why we celebrate Chanukah. And so the question really is, A, why is Maimonides arguing with the Talmud? The Talmud is the law, and we can't argue with the Talmud. We can discuss it, we can argue to understand what it means, what it implies, but we can't argue with a reason or a statement of the Talmud. Maimonides himself says that in his book of laws. So how can Maimonides go ahead and argue with the Talmud? The Talmud says the reason why we celebrate Chanukah is because of the miracle of the oil. And Maimonides says, no, Talmud, you got it wrong. We celebrate Chanukah for 2 reasons, the salvation and the miracle of the oil. And according to Rashi's interpretation of the Talmud, which is there is only 1 reason, why are we ignoring the second reason? What's in the second aspect of Chanukah, the salvation from the Syrian Greeks, that's not so important, and so it's not celebrated? Why skip? Why pass over that aspect, which seems to be the major aspect of the holiday of Chanukah? So there seems to be something much deeper at hand over here, which will which explains why we have these dissenting opinions, these different opinions of Maimonides and Rashi. Now, it reminds me of the famous joke that everything on holidays, all the Jewish holidays, is we take our enemies and we turn them into a food. On Passover, we had Pharaoh. He was a terrible person. We turned him into a matzah. On Shavuos, it wasn't an enemy, but we turned the holiday, we eat cheesecake. On Purim, we had an Haman, turned them into a Hamantash. And on Hanukkah, we had the Syrian Greeks, and we turned them into donuts and latkes. Or put another way, every single Jewish holiday is the same sequence. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. When it comes to Hanukkah, we love eating. We love the donuts, we love the latkes. Someone told me today, Rabbi, I don't eat latkes because I lost I don't eat donuts. I lost 12 pounds. So I'm trying really hard not to have any donuts. But latkes, that I can't say no to. Apparently latkes don't cause any weight gain. I think there's more, I guess latkes are a vegetable, but there's more oil in latkes than donuts. Debatable. Either way, it's all about eating. But the question is, we're familiar with the Passover Seder. Sit down and we have a festive meal. Wash, we have the bread, we have the matzah, we have meat, we have a fancy holiday meal. When it comes to Shabbos, we have Shabbos meal. We have the two challahs, we make kiddush, and so on. When it comes to Purim, there's an obligation to have a festive holiday meal where you wash for bread and you have a festive holiday meal. Same with Sukkot, same with Shavuot, same with every single holiday. We have an obligation to eat a festive meal, which is actually called a seudat mitzvah, a mitzvah festive meal. The festive meal itself is the fulfillment of a mitzvah. What about Chanukah? Is there such an obligation to have a festive meal on Chanukah? Yes, we have Chanukah parties, but is that the same category as the Passover Seder or the Shabbat dinner or the holiday dinner? Or is that a different category entirely? And as the earlier discussion, we have two opinions. Here's a quote from the Code of Jewish Law. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg would say that the many feasts some stage during the days of Hanukkah are only optional. There is no mitzvah to serve a special Hanukkah meal, since the holiday was not established as one of feasting and drinking, but rather one of thanksgiving and praise alone. This is Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Asher in what's known as the Tur. The Tur was the precursor to what's called the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. It was kind of first draft, if you will, and it was written by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. So Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher quotes an earlier sage who explains that apparently in those days it was also the custom to have Hanukkah parties throughout. But he explains that they're optional. There is no mitzvah, as there is on Shabbos, on Passover. There is a mitzvah to have a festive meal. But on Hanukkah, there's no such mitzvah. Why? His key word is at the end. Because the holiday was not established as one of feasting and drinking, but rather one of thanksgiving and praise alone. Which gives us some sort of inkling to what this debate is about. He's explaining that Hanukkah was a holiday that was established as a spiritual holiday. And so the rituals are spiritual. The lighting the menorah is what is to commemorate a spiritual act, the fulfillment of a mitzvah. It's a spiritual concept, kindling a flame, fire, the soul, symbolic of the soul. And so he explains Hanukkah was established as somewhat a spiritual holiday with spiritual exercises to recall the miracle of the oil. And so mandating a physical meal would be irrelevant. That's not what this holiday is about. And so this holiday is only one of spiritual rituals, one of thanksgiving and praise alone. But he's not the only opinion. The other opinion, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, who's known as by his acronym the Bach, he writes, as a matter of law, I tend to disagree with Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, in as much as the custom of eating festive meals on Hanukkah is already widespread and has been supported by the great rabbis of previous generations. The Marshal also writes that the Rambam, Maimonides, implies as such by describing Hanukkah as being days of joy. Rabbi Shalom of Austria writes explicitly that on Hanukkah, one should be joyous and partake in festive meals. In other words, what the Bach is saying, also early, if I'm not mistaken, 15th century sage, 16th century sage, excuse me. And so what he is saying is that there are two opinions. And he's explaining that this debate on whether there is an obligation to have a holiday festive meal on Hanukkah, just like we have in every other one of the holidays, is based on the prior debate between Rashi and Maimonides. What was the debate between Rashi and Maimonides? Rashi said that the purpose of the holiday, the reason why we celebrate Hanukkah, is because of the miracle of the oil. In other words, it's a spiritual celebration. We're celebrating the victory of the oil. the victory of now being able to perform a mitzvah? If so, when it comes to eating a materialistic, physical meal, it's not an obligation this holiday. This holiday is all about the spiritual. Yes, there was the miracle, but we're not celebrating that miracle of the war. We're celebrating only the miracle of the oil, which is a spiritual miracle. And if so, we don't have an obligation to eat a festive meal. The Bach, this second opinion, seems to follow Maimonides' opinion, and he goes to the extent that he quotes Maimonides. In other words, Maimonides, by explaining that the reason for the holiday is not only the miracle of the oil, but also the miracle of winning the war. What's a war? A physical battle for our bodies. If so, the miracle should also be celebrated by a physical obligation, namely something that we enjoy physically, eating food. If so, Bach explains in this text 3b that there is an obligation to eat a festive meal on Chanukah. And that's at the basis of this secondary debate on eating the obligation of eating a festive meal on Chanukah. But it doesn't end here. Why? Why do they have this debate in the first place? Why is Rashi of the opinion that we only follow, and the reason for the holiday of Hanukkah is only the oil, whereas Maimonides is of the opinion that the reason of Hanukkah is for both miracles? Doesn't that make more sense? What's at the core of this debate? Just to end the secondary debate with what do we do? Do we have an obligation to eat a festive meal or not? Not that, at least myself, but not that many of us need a reason to have a festive meal. And it's definitely the custom. It may not be obligatory, but it's definitely the custom. The final verdict is given by Rabbi Moshe Isserles in the Code of Jewish Law, and he writes, the many meals which we add on these days are voluntary meals, since the sages did not establish them as days of feasting and joy. And the Ramah says, Rabbi Moshe Isserles says, some say there is somewhat of a mitzvah to add meals because the altar was rededicated during those days. The prevailing custom is to recite hymns and songs of praise during these Hanukkah feasts, and then they are in any case considered mitzvah meals. So in other words, he says, have those Hanukkah parties, but at the Hanukkah party, turn it into a festive meal that is an obligation. Turn it into something which is a cause for celebration, literally, in other words, associated with something Jewish. Do something Jewish at the festive meal. At the Hanukkah party, say a special prayer, sing a special prayer song, do a special mitzvah that will create that this meal will either way become a meal of a mitzvah. So if you're going to have a Hanukkah party, make special blessings and do some extra prayers at the Hanukkah party. And this way, you can enjoy the party, make the donut and eat it too. Have your cake and eat it. You can make the party and it's a holy meal. But back to that question, the main question that's been bothering us since the beginning. Why? Why this debate? Why not say that it's because of both reasons? What is at the core of this debate between Rashi and Maimonides? Is it only for the miracle of the oil, or is it also for the miracle of the war? And to answer this question, we need to give a little bit historical background of the Maccabees. See, the story of Hanukkah took place 140 before the Common Era, 2nd century BCE. But for hundreds of years, the Jewish people in Israel were under foreign occupation. It wasn't something new at the time of the Hasmoneans, at the time of the Maccabees, that the Syrian Greeks just suddenly came in and overthrew the Jewish government. That wasn't the case. For hundreds of years, the Jews and the temple were under foreign occupation. From the destruction of the first temple, which was in 423 before the Common Era, until the year of the Maccabees, 140 before the Common Era, Those few hundred years, the land of Israel changed hands between the Babylonians, the Persians, the Syrian Greeks. It wasn't something new. It wasn't under Jewish control for the majority of that time. If so, what was unique about the Maccabees? Why did they suddenly decide to take up arms and fight for their country? Leading up to the Maccabees, things were far from rosy. Leading up to that period of time, the Jewish people had tremendous taxes levied against them by the oppression governments, by the occupation governments at the time, whether it was the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks. They had these tremendous taxes. They had certain rules that were eroding them, that were holding them back from fulfilling certain freedoms. But for the most part, freedom of religion was allowed. The Jews practiced Judaism. They did mitzvahs. They put on tefillin. They kept Shabbos. They ate kosher. They performed circumcision. But then things took a terrible turn. Antiochus the Great, Antiochus, I think it was Antiochus the Fourth, became king, Syrian Greek king, in the year 174. And when he became king, the ruler over Israel, he was known as the madman. Because slowly but surely he started instituting rules and laws which really was tantamount to systematic suppression of Judaism, Jewish belief, Jewish practices. He outlawed the keeping of Shabbat. He outlawed the putting on tefillin. He outlawed circumcision. He outlawed belief in God. And one by one, he started outlawing commandments, study of Torah. And anyone caught with doing any one of these laws, a mother caught with having a mole perform circumcision on her son, was killed in a very gruesome fashion. Someone who was caught keeping Shabbos was murdered. Same with studying Torah, which is the reason why we play dreidel. The Jewish children were not allowed to study Torah, and so they risked their lives to study Torah in secret. And when the Greek soldiers would arrive at these secret hideouts where they would be studying Torah, they would quickly hide the Torah text and pull out dreidels. And so to commemorate that aspect of the miracle, we play dreidel. And so in other words, the Jewish people up until that time, it wasn't so rosy, it wasn't such a good situation from the beginning of time, but they were able to perform the commandments. Yes, they were under foreign occupation. Yes, they did not have control of their own lands, but at least they were able to fulfill the commandments. Once Antiochus IV in 174 BCE took over, and things started taking a turn for the worse spiritually, that's when the Maccabees decided now it has gone too far. It's been a few hundred years of occupation, but this is too far. We can't lose our soul. And losing their soul, they were. Jews were becoming Hellenists fast and furious. The temple was overrun by the Greeks and they placed idols in the temple. It was a terrible sight of what was going on spiritually with the soul of Judaism in Israel. And then came the small band of brothers, 5 brothers, Eliezer, Yehuda, Yochanan, Yonasan, and Shimon, the 5 sons of Matisyahu, the high priest. And they came together with the rallying cry, Mi lahashem Elai, who is to God, follow me. And their name, Maccabi. What does Maccabi stand for? Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem. Who is like you amongst the strong ones, O God? In other words, the rallying cry, the purpose of the Maccabees, it wasn't so much the physical oppression that they were having. It wasn't so much the fact that they were under foreign government. So be it if that's the way it is. What bothered them and what caused them to take up arms was the spiritual change. Suddenly, they were no longer able to put on tefillin. They were no longer allowed to keep Shabbos. And that is when it took a step too far. And that's when the Maccabees decided, you know what? The Syrian Greeks are threatening our spiritual existence. Now it's time to end the hundreds of years of willful political submission. And willful it was because they haven't taken up arms before them. As a matter of fact, the Talmud relates a famous story of Shimon, the high priest, who at the time that of Alexander the Great, when he conquered Israel, he approached the city of Jerusalem, and the Jewish people were fearful. What's going to happen? Is he going to destroy the temple? Is he going to overrun Jerusalem? And so the priests, led by the high priest, Shimon the high priest, they dressed in their finest priestly garments, and they left the temple, and they left the gates of Jerusalem to go and greet Alexander the Great, unsure of how it's going to end. And lo and behold, as they get closer to Alexander the Great, leading his army, and he sees the high priest, he dismounts his horse and prostrates himself before the high priest. Everyone around shocked at what they just had witnessed, awaited an explanation, and Alexander the Great then explained that whenever he went into battle the night before, he saw a vision of this high priest come to him. And that's how he knew he'd be victorious. And he granted that the Jews should continue living in peace. As a matter of fact, and in thanks to his allowing the Jewish people to continue and helping them in whatever they needed, the sages instituted two things. First one was that all Jewish boys that were to be born in that year were to be given the name Alexander in commemoration of Alexander the Great. As a matter of fact, till today, Alexander is considered a Jewish name, and there are many, many Jews that have that name, including my brother-in-law, whose Hebrew name is Alexander. And the second thing that was done to honor Alexander the Great's commitment to the Jewish people was they instituted a counting on their documentation. You always write the year on the documentation. Now you write in secular documents, it's the secular year. Jewish documents, it's the year since creation. At that time, the rabbis instituted that they should write the year of Alexander the Great. And that was the year that was written for the next, give or take, 1,000 years in his honor. So the Jews got along, so to speak, with their foreign occupiers, but they were occupiers nonetheless. And so things only took a turn for the worse. The Maccabees, only the Jewish people, only decided to take up arms when their spiritual well-being was under attack. And that's the key. That's the key of Chanukah. When they're under spiritual assault, that's when they started to take up arms. Now it reframes our entire vision and our entire understanding of the victory of Chanukah. It wasn't a physical battle. In other words, in reality, it was a physical battle. There were people who were dying, there were soldiers on either side, there was weapons and so on and so forth. But at the core of it was a spiritual battle, a battle for the spiritual well-being of the Jewish people. As articulated beautifully by the 17th century sage, Rabbi Mordechai Yaffe. Purim involved a decree by Haman to physically obliterate the Jewish people. As such, it is fitting to celebrate the physical survival of our nation by engaging in the physical pleasures of eating and drinking. By contrast, Hanukkah is a celebration of the victory of the Jewish spirit over the pressure exerted by Hellenistic culture. The Greeks did not threaten to kill the Jews, but rather issued decrees against the performance of numerous Torah commandments. Antiochus did this as the common practice of conquerors imposing their faith and culture on their victims, after which all he would do was tax them and nothing more. Therefore, Hanukkah's main focus is spiritual, to give thanks and praise God who helped us regain our independence, thereby preserving our religious identity. As opposed to Purim, which was a literal, a physical, and materialistic victory, Haman had decreed through, Achashverosh had decreed through Haman, that all Jews were to be annihilated, whether they were religious or not, whether they performed commandments or not, made no difference. Jews were to be annihilated. So too, as opposed to that was Chanukah. There was no decree that Jews were to be annihilated. There was no decree that Jews were to be killed. There was a decree that anyone who performed a mitzvah was to be killed. The mitzvahs were the problem. It was a spiritual battle. And now we have a full understanding of why the Talmud explains that the reason for Hanukkah is not so much the miracle of the battle as it is the miracle of the oil. The miracle of the oil is the greatest expression of that victory. They were now able to re-enter the temple, which was made into a place of idol worshiping, get rid of the idols, find the oil, and the oil miraculously lasted for 8 days. What better testament to the survival of the spiritual soul of the Jewish people, of Judaism, than that? And that's really why the Maccabees fought in the first place, for that victory. So by celebrating that victory, yes, we're also celebrating the victory of the battle, but it wasn't about the battle. That was a means to an end. The end was the victory of the oil. And so the Rebbe explains really that the discussion or debate between Maimonides and Rashi is not really a debate. They're just focusing on two different aspects. The argument between the two views, Hanukkah being established for the military miracles or only because of the miracle of the oil, is not an argument over fact. All agree that the physical oppression began as a result of spiritual suppression. The argument is rather a matter of opinion. Is a joyous holiday warranted for a physical redemption precipitated by religious decrees or not? So the entire battle that the Maccabees fought against the Syrian Greeks and emerged victorious was not about the physical battle. It wasn't about being oppressed. It wasn't about not having full control of Israel. It wasn't about that. It was about not being able to fulfill the commandments. It was about not being able to put on tefillin. It was about not being able to light the menorah in the temple. It was about not being able to keep Shabbos or perform circumcision or eat kosher and so on and so forth. And many Jews were being lost to the Hellenistic ways of the Assyrian Greeks. And the Maccabees saw it as they had no choice. But now is the time to take up arms and get rid of our political suppressors. Not because we want political control over Israel, but because we need to put on tefillin. We need to light the menorah in the temple. We need to keep Shabbos. We need to eat kosher. And really, that's what Hanukkah is all about. The jelly donuts, the latkes, the lighting of the menorah, the presents, the Hanukkah gelt, all of that is all for this one end in sight. Be able to put on tefillin one more time. Some may argue it's the most spiritual holiday from all the holidays. It's the only holiday that does not have an obligation to go ahead and enjoy a physical meal. Precisely because of that, because it is a spiritual holiday. It was on the spirit of the Jewish people. It was the battle for our soul. That answers the question why Maimonides and Rashi have that debate. They're not debating the facts. They're just discussing, should we also commemorate that means to an end the victory of the battle or not? But they all agree that the purpose of the battle was just that. It was a means to an end. Which is why, as the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, finishes off, he says, we do have somewhat of obligation. He kind of leaves it a little bit shaky, that there is no literal obligation, but we could turn it into a mitzvah meal if we do something holy at that meal. And that's a key point to always remember when it comes to Hanukkah, especially here in the United States with the commercialization of Hanukkah. And the idea that it's all about the gifts and the latkes and the donuts. Latkes and donuts are also important. They're important because it's a custom, it's a Jewish custom to eat latkes and donuts. But we can't lose sight of the goal. We can't lose sight of the main purpose of why the Maccabees fought on the front lines. They fought for us to be able to put on tefillin. They fought for us to be able to light Shabbos candles and to eat kosher and to perform circumcision and so on. That is the miracle of Hanukkah. That is the meaning behind the lights. That is the meaning behind the menorah, the performance of the mitzvahs. Now, it's interesting to note that when it comes to celebrating a victory, in Judaism, we don't always celebrate major victories. We also celebrate the victories that are on the way to the major victories. And sometimes we don't even have a major victory in the end. See, in life, when we go through our every day, we go through life, and we like to focus on the negative. If I were to ask you, what are 5 of your most recent accomplishments? We'll think about it. Some of us may have a hard time thinking about accomplishments when really throughout every day we have many, many, many accomplishments. But we like to focus on where we fail. We like to focus on the one thing we did wrong, or on the many things that we may have done wrong, the mistakes that we made. Look, I'm not so good at this, and I'm not so good at that. I couldn't be better at this. I meet people and I say, let's do a mitzvah. And he says, Rabbi, I'm a bad Jew. And then 5 minutes into discussion, I find out that he puts on tefillin every day. Why is he saying he's a bad Jew? Because he knows he doesn't eat kosher. But hey, but you do put on tefillin every day, or you do light Shabbos candles every Friday. You're a great Jew. All right, the other things, we got to work on it step by step. That's all right. Instead of saying I'm a bad Jew because I don't do this, I'm a great Jew because I do this. I have these accomplishments. I put on tefillin every day. I light Shabbos candles. We have those achievements. We have those victories because it's an inner battle. It's a constant struggle to do good or to do bad, to be neutral, which, as discussed in last week's class, can be bad. But Torah teaches us that we got to focus on their small battles. On those small battles, that's really where they are at. Just to point out, one festive meal, so to speak, which is done on a personal achievement, right? We're familiar with Hanukkah, we're familiar with Purim, we're familiar with the holiday meals that are done on either collective achievements or collective miracles that God has done to us. How about when we have our own singular achievement? The Talmud says, Abaya said, may I receive my reward? For when I see a young Torah scholar who has completed a tractate that he studied, I make a feast for the sages. In other words, the Talmud is teaching us that when someone completes a tractate of a Talmud, he ought to make a festive meal, a holiday meal. It's a celebration. And the Code of Jewish Law actually issues that ruling. It is a mitzvah to rejoice and to make a festive meal when one completes a tractate of Talmud. This meal is considered a mitzvah. But hold on, the student who's studying this tractate can say, hold on, I only studied one tractate. There are tens of other tractates. Look how terrible I am. I only completed one tractate. No, says the Talmud, and it's actually the law. We got to celebrate that study of that tractate. It doesn't matter how big or how small. It doesn't matter how much time it took you to study it. You completed a tractate, celebrate that victory. And you know what? Celebrating that victory will push you to celebrate more. I think there's a term for it in modern psychology. They always tell you to celebrate the small wins. The small wins what you celebrate. Judaism has been teaching this all along. And it goes a step further. It goes a step further because Hasidic thought teaches us that when it comes to the daily grind, the daily battles that we have those battles sometimes hourly, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, whatever those battles may be. We have those battles of, should I do good? Should I do bad? Should I do good or should I just, it's all right, this time I'll skip it. What's a big deal? You know what? I missed the night of menorah lighting. It's not a big deal. It's fine. I've done it in the past. I'd probably do it in the future. And then a day or two later, we'll think back at that battle, that minor battle that we had, and we'll think, hey, I failed. And then we'll say, what? The day before, I passed that battle with flying colors. I won that battle. Winning that battle was just a fluke. Look how terrible I am. I'm a terrible Jew. I don't do the things that I should be doing. Or whatever it is in business or with family, we tend to focus on those negative points. But Hasidus teaches us something fascinating. That is to focus on those failings and not see our mini victories as victory would be technically true if we were but one person. And so I failed. I'm terrible. But in reality, we're two people. Inside of us, there are two souls. There's the godly soul and there's the animalistic soul. And the godly soul and the animalistic soul are in a constant battle. The godly soul only wants to perform mitzvahs. The animalistic soul would just want to eat steak and watch television all day, eat popcorn. I don't know why. Each one with their own animalistic tendencies, each one with their own evil inclination. Evil doesn't necessarily mean evil as we see it in a literal level of thievery and the like. It means evil spiritually. And so the animalistic soul and the godly soul are in this constant struggle. And every little victory that the godly soul emerges victorious, even if it's just for 5 minutes, that's a tremendous victory because he overpowered the animalistic soul. It's an inner battle. It's an inner war that has many little battles. You got to focus on every battle. You got to focus on winning the battle. And on those little battles that you win, celebrate them. Don't focus on the battles that you lose. Focus on the battles that you win. The words of the Alter Rebbe. The body is called a small city. Imagine two kings waging war over a town, each one wishing to capture it and rule over it, namely to dominate its inhabitants according to his will, so that they obey him in all that he decrees for them. So it is with the two souls. The divine soul and the vitalizing animal soul that comes from Klippa. They wage war against each other over the body and all its limbs. And continues the Alter Rebbe, when the evil side does overpower you and wins you over, for this reason, because of this internal battle which is constantly there, no person should feel depressed, nor should his heart become exceedingly troubled, because though he may be engaged in this conflict for the rest of his days, perhaps it was for this very reason that he was created, for this mission, to continually overcome evil. Part of waging a successful war is simply taking on the challenges, explaining the Alter Rebbe. Wage that war. Who says it's for you to win that war? It's for you to wage that war. And those little victories, focus on them. Celebrate every little victory, because that's your mission, to have those little victories. Your mission isn't to have that great victory that may be beyond you. And so when you fail, know that that's not who you are. That happens to be a fluke, that happens to be a failure, that you have an animalistic soul, and it's tough. You lose those little battles sometimes. Don't focus on it. Keep on going. Because your mission is to have that constant battle and have those many victories. And then celebrate those many victories as often as you can. The Alter Rebbe continues. Indeed, the rabbis of blessed memory have said, he who has passively abstained from committing a sin receives a reward as though he had performed a mitzvah. But what do you mean? Big deal? It's a big deal because it may be a little battle, but it's a victory. It's a victory of the godly soul over the animalistic soul. Consequently, when one ought to rejoice in controlling his thoughts just as he would when performing an actual mitzvah. Moreover, sadness on account of the propensity to negative thinking only comes from conceit. He simply does not recognize his place, that he has these two souls. Hence, he is sad at heart because he has not attained the rank of a righteous person, a tzaddik. While the righteous are certainly not troubled by such foolish thoughts. But had he recognized his station, that he is very far from the rank of a tzaddik, then he should be happy being an intermediary and not a Russian evil person for every single moment, for even a single moment. This is the quality of the in-betweeners and their service, to subdue the evil impulse and thoughts rising from the heart to the brain, and to completely avert the mind therefrom, thrusting the temptation away with both hands, as has been explained earlier. So we're not going to get all the way too deeply into this topic, but suffice it to say that what the Alter Rebbe is explaining here is this exact concept. It's not for us to be that righteous one. That's not why God put us here in this world. God put us here in this world to wage that war. Are we going to win it? We're going to win the small battles. Are we going to win the major battle? Probably not. It's nearly impossible. But that's not why God put us here in this world. God put us here to wage that war, to have those battles, and to win some of them, but do our best. And not let the losses get us down. Because if it does, we're giving in to the animalistic soul. If it does, we're giving in to the evil inclination. But when we have a victory, however small that victory is, celebrate it. Give yourself a pat on your back. Don't get arrogant about it, but give yourself a pat on the back and say, we did it. We did it. We completed it. And we're going to celebrate it because we won that mini battle. If we have those struggles, it doesn't show that we're a bad person. If we have those struggles, that means that we have those two souls who are in constant battle. And so we got to do our best to overcome those battles. So taking cue from the victory of Chanukah is this idea of the little victories. May not mean to go ahead and celebrate a major celebration, have a festive meal, but it means to give us that moment to stop and to recognize we had this victory. It's a victory of the good over evil. Let's celebrate it, however small it may be. And getting back to the victory of Chanukah, we can't forget that the main victory of Chanukah, which is why the Talmud stresses on the miracle of the oil, and actually explains that that's the only reason why we celebrate Chanukah, is because that's what Chanukah is really all about. Even the physical battle over our bodies was fought solely as a response to the spiritual oppression of the Syrian Greeks. And so the victory of Chanukah is the victory of the oil, mainly, in other words, the victory of the soul, the victory of the performance of the mitzvahs, and the study. So happy Chanukah, everyone. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to seeing